everybody into another edition of the Show Me Hoops podcast. Coach David Heeb. I'm joined by my brother, Coach Toby Heeb of the North Pim by any means necessary Mustangs. Toby,
any means.
By any means, never lost. And so
never lost, doing what it takes.
Doing what it takes.
Welcome back, everybody.
And America, I want right now.
You listen to me closer than you've ever listened to me before.
I want you guys all to listen to me because here in just a minute, I'm going to play part of our exclusive interview with Coach Lennies McFerren, 9-time state championship coach, the 2000 National High School Coach of the Year. He's currently come out of retirement to be the head coach at Kennett High School, and he came on tonight to talk a little basketball with us. And that's one of the great things, Toby, about having some Hall of Fame coaches in your Rolodex.
That's right.
You just text them and say, hey, you want to come on and talk basketball with me? And most of the time they say yes. And so Coach Mack.
And what's more fascinating is that you text Coach Mack.
Yeah. I texted Coach Mack, and he is a texter, and so we had a great talk. And Coach McFerren is just one of a kind, So we had a really good talk, and I want to share that with everybody. Before we do, I just want to say we cannot get the whole talk in, and so that's we talked on the phone for over an hour. Coach Mack and I did. We had a lot to talk about. We hadn't caught up in just a little bit, so we had a lot to talk about. But the parts that we did get to was really, really fascinating. And so some of the things that we talk about in this, we'll play the whole thing. We'll upload that so people can listen to the entire podcast, the entire interview. But we talked about his coaching philosophy and where that came from. I asked him to walk me through a little bit of a typical practice. I loved his answer on that. It was really, really fascinating. We talked about some of kind of the career-changing moments that he had. He told a really neat story about early in his career when he was coaching at the Final Four, actually the first Final Four he ever got to as a coach. And then he gave some great advice to coaches, and in typical Coach McFerren fashion, he kind of went on a tangent telling another story. and he got to talking about just kind of the state of the game, AAU basketball, just all.
Can't wait to hear his perspective on
all of that in a nutshell, and it was terrific. And so, anyway, I'm going to kind of let this play, unless you want to say something about Coach McFerren. You have a unique experience about. He said to say hi to you. By the way, he wanted to tell you hi. But you were actually a student while he was a principal, and so. Do you have a Coach Mack story that you'd like to share with everybody?
Well, there's a little bit. I have, like you said, a unique experience. I was a sophomore the year Coach Mack was my principal, and, he come to be the principal. You were the head coach, and he come to practice. You had him come a couple times, and I remember one vividly where he put us all in lines, and we done the defensive drills where we're sliding right, sliding left, going back, take charge, jump up, rebound, stuff everybody does. But for some reason, it was just a little bit different when he had done it, because here it is. This is 12 years ago. I don't know how Coach Mack, how old he is now, or, so however old he was then, he was out there in a pair of shorts after school. He had done changed from a suit to a pair of shorts and a T-shirt, and he got down in the stance, and he slid with us, and he went back. Whatever he told us to do, he was doing. So kind of standing there as a 15, 16-year-old kid, you said to yourself, I've got to get down because he is. And, just the energy and the presence that he brought was something special to a practice.
And what I remember is him coming in his coaching shorts. Like
yes.
He had just, he was ready. Like he was ready.
Right.
And so
he had waited for that moment.
Yeah, he was, and he's a good friend of mine. He's somebody who I've called when I need advice, and I have called him off and on throughout the years. And I want to tell this story real quick, and then I'm going to play the interview because I know everybody that's listening wants to hear him talk instead of me. But I got the news last week that he was going to retire. So for those of you that are out there listening and don't know, my kids go to school at Kennett. I'm divorced. My kids go to school at Kennett. So I'm going to go pick my kids up Friday So I figured out, where are they playing at that night? Is there a game in town? Well, they're actually playing Charleston. So that's pretty historic, because Coach Mack, that's where most of his career was spent at Charleston. So I'm going to try to go see him coach one last time, but I'm going to get to see him coach against Charleston on top of that. Well, the coach at Charleston is Danny Farmer, who was a teacher at Scott County Central when I was growing up. From kindergarten to 10th grade, Coach Farmer taught there. So before the game, I go sit with Coach Farmer. He and I have a good long talk, and, love Coach Farmer to death. He's a good man. And so the game gets over, the JV game, and I go down to talk to Coach Mack between games. He wasn't there for the JV game. There was a big chili supper, and he got caught up, so he didn't come out until right when the JV game was starting. And so at halftime or between games, somewhere in there, I go down to courtside with my daughter Lenny. Lenny's in 7th grade. She's a pretty good ball player. She's heard me tell 100 stories about Coach McFerren, right? So we're sitting up in the bleachers, and I point down. I said, Lenny, there he is right there. Coach Lennies McFerren, greatest of all time.
The GOAT.
She's the GOAT. That's what I said. She said, where? I said, right there, and I pointed at the bench again. She said, which one? Now, you got to understand the 3 coaches at Kennett are Fred Garman, Jack Walls, who are both early to mid-20s, and then Lennies McFerren. It's not hard to tell which one has been coaching forever.
You should know. Yeah.
Right.
Put 2 and 2 together.
She looks at me. She says, Dad, he's black. I said, yeah, I know. She said, this whole time you've told me all these stories about him, I never knew he was black. She said, his name's Lennies McFerren, and I never thought about it. But, I never even pointed out if he's black, white, or anything else. I just think he's a great guy. And so my daughter this whole time, so we go down to I said, I'm going to introduce you to Coach Mack. So we go down. He comes out. He hugs my neck. David, I ain't seen you in forever, blah, blah, blah. He was talking and everything, and I said, Coach Mack, this is my daughter, Laney. He said, girl, don't shake my hand, hug my neck. He gives Laney a big hug, and I said, Coach, I got to tell you this story. And so I told him that. Coach, she thought you were white. And we laughed so hard. And he said, Laney, I've been called a lot of things in my life. I've never been called a white man. And so so I said, Laney, you just have one of the great, all-time great Coach Mack stories, and you didn't even mean to. And so
it
was a cool
That's how
thing.
it happens, though.
And but yeah, she got to meet Coach Mack, and it was really, really a cool Good moment. So with that being said, I'm going to play this interview, me and my good friend, the legendary Coach Lennies McFerren. I'm Coach David Heeb. I'm joined here tonight on the podcast with a very special guest, Coach Lennies McFerren. Coach, thanks for joining us.
Glad to be able to talk to you. It was a long time no hear from. I ain't know where you was at.
Yeah, and so just to kind of get this started, I want to just say on a personal level, and I have told this story to many people. I told this to Brandon Blankenship last night. I said, just to me personally, as a young coach, I was very fortunate to come and work for you. You were my boss. You were the principal there at Scott County Central. And I always tell people, in all of our lives, there's that line. It's kind of like before and after. Like before this happened, I was one way, and after this happened, I was another way. And for me, you were one of those lines in my life, like before and after. You really helped me grow up a lot. You really, you were good to me. You treated me good, but you were hard on me and helped me grow up. And so just on a personal level, I love you to death, and I appreciate you. And then, of course, as a coach, you're as good as anybody that's ever done it. So I really do appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Well, I appreciate you thinking that way. And again, anything that I've done in our professionalism, and, just let me just say this. We say and do things for people that we care about. We don't want to see the people that we care about do poorly. We want them to be successful, and that's the way it was with me. When you came along, I know you have had so much success. I just wanted you to make sure that you could dot your I's and cross your T's, because everybody that seems like they like you don't necessarily mean that they like you.
That's exactly right. And, I tell this story about you to everybody. They say, what was it like working for Coach McFerren? And I said, well, 2 things. One, he does not waste any words. Like, he tells you exactly how it is. Like he cuts straight to it. And the second
Well,
thing,
that's because my vocabulary is very limited.
yeah, no, I just think you don't like wasting time. You get right to the truth. And the other thing about, I tell people, I say, he was so meticulous. He was so organized. I'd come in your office and all the papers was in the right place on the desk. And I say the best story I can tell about it was one day in the locker room, you liked everything to be clean. So I try to keep everything clean. And one day, man, I had this locker room clean. I had picked everything up and I had swept, and you came in the locker room and you were kind of impressed. You were like, man, David really cleaned this locker room today. But you couldn't let me know that. So what you did is you took your finger and you wiped it on the windowsill checking for dust. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, is he serious right now? Like, is he checking for dust in this locker room? And so but that was your way of telling me, good job, but you still can do better, you know. And so it's just the way that you were. But, Coach, I want to ask you, Toby and I were talking about this before you called. And in my opinion, you're the greatest defensive coach ever. And, arguably the greatest coach ever, period. But defensively, that's where you made your mark. And I asked this question to Toby. I said, it's interesting to me, with the players that you had, you guys were so good defensively. But if you had chosen to be, say, Ronnie Cookson and run up and down the floor and score 100 points, you could have done that too. And vice versa. If Coach Cookson would have said, I want to focus on defense and beat people 45-38, he could have done that with the kids he had at Scott County. So it's kind of just a general question. Why do you think that you settled in as a defensive coach? So, like, was that something that you wanted to do because that's just who you are, or is that something that you picked up from somebody else? Like, what made you decide you wanted to be that great defensive coach?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that question because that's a very easy question to answer. And it came from, I did not know anything about defense when I was in high school. Everything I found out about defense or learned about defense came from my stay when I played ball over at Three Rivers for Coach Gene Best. And I would tell anybody that because, again, not saying that Coach Best was God or anything, but he was the only person or the first person that I knew anything about defense. And so I kind of copied it of what I was taught. And then, again, everybody can go out and score. Anytime they get ready, they can score and put the ball up 39, 40 times a night. But it was more interesting to me to stop that person from scoring than it was to score. And so everything that defensively that I've learned throughout my years of basketball came from Three Rivers basketball and Coach Best.
And he's another one that's just defensively. You go watch a practice. He's amazing. Even today, I mean, just to watch the detail. And I tell people this about you, having watched you coach and been in practice with you and watched you put these drills in, your attention to detail, like your hand goes here, your foot goes here. Now, which foot are you stepping out with first? And making sure every kid understands that. You do that as well as anybody I've ever seen, which is why I think your kids are so good defensively, is they're so well schooled in it.
Well, I appreciate that because, again, it's not as easy as people think it is either.
No, it's
because
not.
You have to demand so much discipline to coach defense. People don't even put the word discipline with defense. They always put discipline with offense. But you have to be well disciplined to be able to play defense. And that's one thing, along with just having a lot of guts and heart. But I tell you this, you go and you take a survey of 10 coaches, and you go into their practice, I guarantee you, 8 or 9 out of the 10 coaches, they're going to spend 3/4 of their time developing offensive skills and playing offense. Very few coaches put the time in, and again, it's so much you have to depend on in teaching defense, and no one really want to put a whole lot of time into that now.
And that leads me right into the second thing I wanted to ask you. And again, I've been in the gym with you. I've seen you practice. But walk the people that are listening to this, walk them through a practice. Like, what if I come to practice at Charleston High School in 1985? What was your practice?
I'm going to say this right now. It's back in 1985, and I got out of coaching for quite some time. And I'm doing the same thing that I did in 1985.
I believe
and
that.
you actually walking through it, and again, the practice is you starting off in the defensive slide. We run down to the other end of the court on the sideline. We call it a sideline drill. And what we're working on is a technique for defense with a man dribble the ball. And he's going to go all the way down to the other end. Now we're working on the defensive slide. It's ironic that you mentioned about the feet being in the right position, hands being in the right position, because this is what we're working on. And the offense man is working on his ball handling skills and keeping the ball where the defensive man can't get it. Then we go from the other side, coming down with the other guy with partner switch, and we do the same thing with the partner changing from defense to offense. And then we get back down to the end. Then we call it, every school I've been in Charleston, we call it blue to blue, and New Madrid, we call it green to green, and then in Kennett, we call it black to black, because we're just doing that with the colors of the schools. But what it is, it go from the free throw line extended all the way down to the other end in the sideline, and we go like a zigzag, defending that person dribbling the ball, concentrating, putting emphasis on do not let the man cross over in front of you, and drop step, make sure you be able to keep him in front of you all the way down the court. And I tell all the players that has played for me that if you can make the offensive man turn his back or change direction 2 or 3 times, now that doesn't seem like it's very many times, but if I can defend you and you have to worry about me to get the ball down the court, and I have to zigzag or I have to turn my back 2 or 3 times before I get down there, I have done one heck of a job defending you. So a lot of people don't realize that, but everybody, I can say this, everybody can't do it, and you don't care how much art you have, you got to have some athleticism or some quickness in order to protect that, because again, you can have some good kids, some good players, but if they are slow of foot, then you're gonna have a hard time getting them to accomplish that drill.
And I'm gonna pause that right there, Tobe, so we can kind of talk a little bit about what he just said. So, and I apologize for the audio. I know that I got a couple of texts there that it was hard to hear my questions. You could hear Coach McFerren better than you could hear me.
Which was fine.
I know
we've
that
all heard you enough.
My questions were profound, just so that you guys know. But no, Coach McFerren, he said a couple of really, really good things there. So I want to let you kind of dive into that for just a minute.
And, I wrote a few notes down. I didn't plan on taking this many out of that such short amount of time. But, one thing that fascinated me, and this is something that you taught me coaching, is you coached the way you were coached. And the majority of the way people were coached was in high school, especially high school coaches. Not all of us get to go play at the next level, which Coach Mack did. He played for Coach Bess at Three Rivers, and that's where he learned defense. To me, that was pretty neat that, he didn't know much about defense and all the stuff that he had coached. He did not learn that until he went to Three Rivers Community College and played for Coach Bess. To me, that was really, really cool that he didn't learn that in high school. And then when he gets to talking about how defense isn't easy to teach.
I love what he said about discipline with defense.
The discipline, and to me, something that he didn't say that, I think he would agree upon, and anybody else, I think defense is not easy to teach because it's not fun to learn. You're not seeing the ball go through the basket. Right. It's a lot of talking, a lot of you're not seeing immediate results in practice by learning, defensive slides, defensive stances. You talked a ton about foot positioning in defenses. You're not seeing the results as much, and it's much more of a process. And then he says, 8 to 9 to 10 out of 10 coaches probably develop offense in practice much more than defense. And I agree with that a ton. I'm one of those coaches, way more on offense, where we shoot, drive and kick jump shots about 25 minutes a day. And the majority of our defense is learned through scrimmaging, where, we see a help rotation breakdown or somebody not in the right spot, and we stop it right there and talk about it, versus all these controlled defensive situations.
Well, and I loved what he said, too, about how he enjoyed stopping that other guy from scoring as much as he enjoyed scoring. And that's
a pride thing right there.
That and for those of you that don't know, Coach McFerren he was a Howardville Hawk back in the day, before Howardville, Matthews, New Madrid, Lilburn, all those schools went in together and formed New Madrid County Central.
Yes.
Each of those schools on their own was a dominant program, in their own right. And so, it's one of those things where I just believe that his background as a player, like he said, he didn't get that as much in high school. He got that more from his college playing days. And so I thought, that was really neat to listen to.
One thing, too, to me that was he talked about all that, and then he said something, and, he meant it very seriously. But to me, in my position, I took it, more funny, where he says a thing about anybody can score. Like he's talking about, anybody can score, but not anybody can play defense. And to me, I thought, well, not anybody can score, because we coach kids that are, especially at the lower level, they struggle more and more to put the ball in the basket.
And I think it's
not
fascinating.
Just anybody can score.
I thought it was a neat question. It's something you and I talked about off the air before I talked to Coach Mack. You take the greatest two programs arguably in the history of the state, Scott County Central and Charleston. They were both at their epic peak in the 80s, going against each other. Coach McFerren was a slow it down, grind you out defensive guru. Great coach. Yep. Ronnie Cookson was a fly up and down the floor, zone press, score a whole lot of points. Both programs dominant, both programs polar opposites of each other.
Yeah.
And so to ask him, why did you arrive at that? Well, it's because of his college coach. Whereas I played for Coach Cookson, and I know the way he played was because he grew up at Puxico during the Arnold Ryan years, where they literally invented fast break basketball.
The first ever fast break,
They literally invented it. And so he watched
it was all he knew.
He watched his older brothers and watched those teams play, and then coached with his brother Carroll, who won a couple of state titles. So Coach Cookson came up one way and was extremely successful. I mean, arguably the greatest of all time. I mean, McFerren and Cookson to me are 1A and 1B. It depends on which one you like better. But it's like picking your favorite kid. They're both, they're both just terrific. But they were completely different coaches. You and I were joking the other day. Saxony Lutheran, one of the better Class 3 teams in the state. Kennett is not a dominant team this year. They're very young. Kennett beat them, and the text was going around between a lot of coaches. That's why he's the greatest. I mean,
that's why he's the best. Yep.
He'll beat you 42-36. He's the greatest, and has his own way of doing things. And so, if coaches out there listening, you don't hear anything else, you don't learn anything else. There's 100 different ways to skin a cat. You have to pick which way suits you. Don't try to be somebody else. Coach McFerren didn't try to be somebody else. Coach Cookson didn't try to be somebody else. They were true to what they believed in, and that they got their, like you said, Coach Mack got it from his college coach. Coach Cookson got it as really, truly as an elementary little kid watching a high school team play. And so just it's fascinating where your background could come from.
Coach Cookson is a really, really, really great example of you coach the way you were coached. Whereas Coach Mack learned and adapted throughout his playing career and took bits and pieces from different people.
That's right.
That he played for.
So I'm gonna play a little bit more of this, and I've tried to fix the audio a little bit, and it may be too loud now. Who knows? But I'm gonna try to pick that interview up right where we left off. Well, I say that, and you can't. So
technology.
Check that. Well, it's not going to play out loud if I do it that way. So the audio, you may not hear my question as loud. You might have to get a little closer to the speaker, but we'll try this again. So here's the next part of that interview. You just hit it on the head, Coach. It's I learned something from you watching you practice, and this is again, it's something that's common sense. It should be common sense, but so many kids struggle with this, and I don't hear other coaches say this, but I heard you say to a kid in the drills about run, slide, run. Like, I'm sliding my feet, but if I get beat, to run and catch back up and then slide again. And
right.
You were so good at teaching your kids to do that in the backcourt. And one of the kids that I got to see you coach at New Madrid, this was when I first began coaching, it was my first year actually, was a kid named Byron Minner, who was a tremendous full-court on-the-ball defender. Who was the best on-the-ball defender that you ever had? If you could pick one and say, tonight you're going against a really tough point guard, and we're going to put this guy on the dribbler, who was the best one you ever had?
I would say Byron Miller, because again, Byron Miller, he wasn't the tallest defender that anybody was. He was about 5'9", 5'8", 5'9", but he moved his feet so quickly.
Unbelievable.
Where and again, I had so many point guards that can come to mind. Is my son. I had to put him in there because he had to come on with me, listening to it from practice all the way to the next morning.
That's right.
So he definitely was one of them. You got Carlos McCauley that was played at Charleston. You had Tim Fraser who played at Charleston. These are guards that could really, as Coach Best would say, put the quiet heaters on you. They would shut you down.
That's right.
And Michael Morris, again, Michael Morris probably was one of the players that nobody really heard about until he started playing point guard for me. And the thing about that is you have to have a sense of knowing what you want to do. I can tell you now, of all the players that I've called, like you didn't hear me say Derek Tipper. Derek Tipper probably was one of the best point guards I ever had. But for us defensively, Derek Tipper was trying to steal the ball majority of the time, not stop anybody.
Right.
And he had that knack with his length and his intelligence of the game. He just read the play, and he did that. But some people can't do that, so they have to require being able to be where they're supposed to be when they're supposed to be there. That's what I call discipline. And so it's fun to watch when you have somebody that to buy into the program and buy into what you trying, or the philosophy that you're trying to do.
Yeah, I remember I was a rookie head coach. I'm 22 years old at the time. I drove down to watch you guys play Arcadia Valley at Poplar Bluff. They had a point guard named Chris Foster, who was all everything. Chris was a heck of a player. And ended up going and playing Division I. I think their team was like 27-2, and you guys were all sophomores. This when Derek was a sophomore, and I believe Byron was a junior. Had Ricky Smith was the only senior, and so I drove down there. I hadn't seen you guys play since the River Bend, and I knew you were young. I knew you were talented. And the opening play of that game, Chris Foster took that ball end to end, went right around Byron, went through everybody. He shot a layup, and I said, "Man, this is going to be a good ball game." And about the next 3 or 4 times Chris Foster got the ball, exactly what you said. He looked like he was doing a zigzag drill to get down the floor. He couldn't get by Byron. And then another guy come and took him, and then Byron come back and took him some more. And it's like by halftime, poor Chris Foster couldn't even breathe no more. So you guys end up winning that game by 27 points. And I went home that night, and I'm telling you, that one game changed my philosophy of defense so much. seeing the way that you guys pressured that basketball with multiple people, but the way Byron did it specifically really had an impact on my coaching career.
Well, I'm glad it did, but that's just really the way I feel as though, because this is what I see in basketball players. If you're a shooter, and Foster was one of the best shooters I have ever witnessed to watch and just watch shoot the ball. He was just like a machine to be able to score. He was definitely one of the best shooters I've ever had players to play against. But the thing about it, I know this from a playing myself. You can't shoot the ball as well as you can when you're not tired. When you're tired, you can't shoot it as well as you can when you're not tired.
That's right.
And so that was the strategy that we had that night. I heard so much about this young man. Only thing I can say, well, if he does, he's going to have to go against two of my better defensive players.
That's right.
And doggone it, that's what he did. And he could not shoot the ball the way he thought he could shoot it until he realized he can't do it when he's tired.
And that reminds me of my favorite Coach Mack quote: "Enough pressure, or bust a steel pipe." So
that's exactly right. I still believe that right to this day. But again, you got to have. I heard Norm Stewart. I went to a coaching show, a coaching clinic with Norm Stewart, and with me, no, not with him, but at Norm Stewart coaching clinic in Columbia. And he got up and he talked. You got to remind you that Norm Stewart has got 6'7", 6'8", 6'9" guys back there in the front line and all of that. And he was up there where he said that, well, their philosophy that they push the ball to the baseline. And, the baseline in the high school, you go to the baseline, you're going to score or get fouled majority of the time.
You don't have that 6'10" guy back there. That's right.
There you go. And that's what I said. I said, now he can sit up there and he can do this. But we, as high school coaches, we got a guy back there in the back about 6 foot, 5'11", something like that. We can't allow him to get to the baseline, go baseline. So that's a different way. I say you got to take whatever players you have and try to mold those players with your game and vice versa, and that's what we did.
And I'm gonna pause right there again so we can kind of pick up with what he said there, Tobe. So
yeah,
I love his comment there about you have to take what you have, and you just were talking about that before we listened to that take. Is sometimes you have to work with the players you have,
Yeah.
And that's exactly what Coach Mack is saying right there. And I'll tell a real quick little story about a coaching friend of mine. I won't say his name. But early in my career, we went to a coaching clinic together, and he was taking a lot of these ideas and was going to take them back, which we all do. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think as a coach, you have to be real selective sometimes with what's going to fit your program. In other words,
right.
If you're not a pressing team, let's just use this as an example. If you're not a pressing team and say you're watching, I remember at this particular clinic, Billy Tubbs was there, coach at Texas Christian University. He was at Oklahoma before that, one of the best coaches in the country, and he pressed everybody. So I'm writing down everything he says because maybe something I can take back and put in our press. We were a pressing team. But if you were sitting there at the clinic with me and your team has never pressed before and your kids are not going to press, for you to take one of those ideas back with you would be a mistake. I think as coaches, and I've talked about that on here before, you have to have a filter as a coach. You have to know it can be a great idea, but it's just not a great idea for your team.
Yeah.
And so Coach Mack was talking about that right there, and I think that's something really good for coaches to think about.
Yeah. Well, first, before I get to a couple things he had said there that I liked, I'm going to agree and disagree with what you just said about taking things back. I think, if you think it's a good idea as a coach, then take it back, even if it's not going to fit your team right now. Because like we had just said, you got to adapt with the players you have. One day you might have that pressing team, and you're going to go back through those notes that you have taken.
Oh, I didn't say don't
years.
write it down. I didn't say don't write it down.
Yeah, I'm just saying it's not a mistake.
Right.
And I don't think it would be that way. You never know when you might pull that one out. So, take whatever you think you like. And what I like to do, especially watching a ton of stuff, that now that everything's on YouTube, I always look at things, a play or a defense, and think, how can I use this for my guys? And if I look at it a couple times and think, there's no way we can really fit this into what we do, then I don't think about it anymore. But I don't ever look at it like, how can we do it the way they do it? I look at it, how can I take it and maybe twist it to where it fits with how we run an offense or whatever it may be. But, two things that I just took from the section you just played from Coach Mack. He talked about, he got to talking about Derek Tipler, who was a heck of a point guard.
Unbelievable player.
I remember going to a Three Rivers team camp when I was maybe 7th or 8th grade. And we stayed the night over there at Papa Bluff, and it was going into Tipler's freshman year in college.
And I had him come talk to you guys.
You had him come talk to us, and I remember two things. One, that he said, you know what I'm saying, a lot.
Yeah.
And two, like just looking at him, he's obviously a very short player, but he just looked like a freak athlete. And he got out there during the camps, and I went to a player camp. It was an individual skill thing, and learned a little bit from him. So Coach Mack talked about him, and he used the phrase "still versus stop."
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he said it that way, but he said, Tipler played for a still, whereas a guy like Minner played for getting a stop. And he said Tipler could do that because he had a knack for the game, and he understood it. He was a very smart player, so he knew when he could get the steal. But then it was also, and this is going to be the majority of players that most high school coaches have, they have to play to get a stop and not a steal. And in order to do that, Coach Mack said you have to be extremely disciplined. And
I was watching our high school team play about a week ago. We played Fayette. Fayette's like 14-1 or something like that. They're ranked way up high in the state in Class 2. They got a good, solid ball team. We had them beat at home. We ended up losing on a shot at the buzzer. They never led until probably a minute and a half to go in the game. Then we retook the lead, and they made a shot at the buzzer and beat us. Our coach and I were talking the next day after that, something like that. And I kind of said something similar to that to him was, it was a good ball game. We were in control the whole game. But somewhere in the second half, both teams started fouling each other. And it turned into it was a very physical, very hard-fought game, both teams beating on each other. And I said, if we could have or them, either team, whichever team figured it out first, that, you know what, we need to get a little more discipline on defense for a minute or two, and we'll get control of this game because the other team probably would not stop fouling. Like, that's one example of discipline on defense. And Coach McFerren talks about that. I think that's something very true. Think about this. How many teams do you know that would sit there and play defense for 45 seconds and keep trying to stop you? Most teams, somewhere in the middle of that first 15 or 20 seconds, if they haven't got a steal yet, they haven't got a rebound, forced you into a shot, something like that, they're going to break down.
They're going to get a little antsy somewhere.
It takes so much discipline to just, like, if that offense is disciplined and they keep running their stuff, most defenses are not that disciplined. Matter of fact, Coach Bess over at Three Rivers, winningest coach in the history of basketball at any level, Coach Bess has a saying, get it to the third side of the floor on offense. Come down on offense. We got it on the right side, reverse it to the left side, and then look for something over there. If it's not there, reverse it back to the right side. So you got the first side, the second side, the third side of the floor. If you can basically reverse the ball twice,
2 times,
the defense will probably break down most of the time.
Yeah.
Like, you're not.
And that's something, offensively, I preach to our kids, and it's all about. You and I always talk that first pass.
Yep. The first pass is the hardest pass to make.
And, if you can get that first pass in, you might get a breakdown. But then if you can get another one, the more passes, the more movement, the more likely the defense is to break down. So when you really think about that, especially at the level the Coach McFerren teams were competing at, to play defense for the amount of time that they would play it and not break down, that really goes to say how disciplined that they were.
Well, and we're not going to have time to listen to everything. We got less than 5 minutes in the show here. And again, to everybody who's listening, I will upload the whole interview with Coach Mack. It's about 40 minutes long. He gets to talking about the time they held Vashon to 4 points and a half. He talks about, like I said, the current state of high school basketball, AAU basketball. He got into that a little bit. He talks about advice he would give coaches now trying to build a program. If he were starting out all over again, what he might do, with today's kids. They're a little bit different. Just, fascinating stuff. And like I said to him on the interview, I just think the guy is a national treasure. I mean, like if you ever had any chance to spend time around him, he's all about helping other coaches, other teachers, people in education. He's done so much good for basketball in our state, and and especially right there in our area. You look at some of the coaching roots that are out there. Corey Frazier, a good friend of ours who's coaching the St. Louis area now, a friend of the program, been on the podcast before. Corey played for Coach McFerren, is now one of the coaches for Team USA 18 and under Olympic team.
Unbelievable.
You got Lamont Frazier, another one of the Fraziers who's been a high school coach, been a college coach. You've got Travis Day there at New Madrid, New Madrid County Central. That's Coach McFerren. It's where he actually grew up. It's so many different people have crossed paths with this guy at some point in their career. At some point, it's just amazing to look at the impact that he has had on a game of basketball, especially in that part of the state where we are known for pressure defense.
Right.
And Coach McFerren certainly, since this is a tribute to him, and we just got a little bit of time here left, just not enough good things we can say about Coach McFerren.
And I think, like you said, he's just one of those people when he walks into a building or a room, and like I was saying earlier, when he would come down around practice, you just feel his presence as a person, and without saying anything, you kind of fall in line. I remember this one's a funnier story that I had that's a unique one since I was a student while he was principal. We had a teacher, something happened one day, my sophomore year, she didn't show up to school, and we were all sitting there in second hour class, and nobody had heard from this teacher. Well, there's 8 of us in class. We were all good kids. He walks in, checks on us, and says, "Where's your teacher at?" I'm like, "Well, we ain't seen her. She ain't here today." So he was mad about that. We could tell it. He was very mad. And then he looked at us, and he kind of gave us a look and said, "Y'all seem like you're doing good. Stay good. Don't do anything crazy." Shut the door and walked off. And I think he trusted us, but at the same extent, I think he knew that because of him, we weren't going to do anything crazy because we didn't want to face him.
Well, and I'll tell this real quick one, and then we got to go. It's going to cut us off, but. He was just legendary disciplinarian, and I remember I had we still paddle in Southeast Missouri. First kid he ever paddled at Scott Central, I had to witness the SWAT. I was in there as the witness, and I won't say the kid's name or anything like that, but this was a younger kid. He paddled him, and on the second SWAT, I mean, the kid felt it.
Always did too.
He on the second SWAT, when he let that second one go, he said, "Pow," and then he said, "Now go tell all your friends about that." And I tell this, and it's the gospel truth. I don't think anybody got in trouble at Scott County Central for about 3 weeks after that SWAT.
And that's saying something right there.
Yeah, the word traveled through the hallways. And so we'll cut it off right here. Guys, listen to the rest of the podcast. It'll be up on the website here in about 5 minutes, justwintoday.com. Go to the podcast section and find the rest of our interview with Coach McFerren. Tobe, this was fun.
That's right. JWT.
JWT. We'll do it again next week.